Why was everyone laughing at her? The question hung in the sterile air of the simulator bay like the echo of a bad joke that no one wanted to own. The young officers clustered near the glass partition, their laughter sharp, insecure, too loud for what they were really feeling. They called it banter, but it was the kind that always came from fear, fear of something they didn't understand. "Look, ma'am, with all due respect," Lieutenant Commander Thorne said, half smiling, half snarling. "This is an advanced aerial combat simulator, not a video game for civilians to play with." He let his words linger, turning his head so the others could catch the glint in his eyes. They did, and they laughed again. "We've got pilots here with thousands of flight hours who can't handle the Omega Protocol. Maybe you should grab a coffee and let the professionals do their job." The woman he was mocking didn't flinch. She simply stood by the simulator's entrance, quiet, hands at her sides. Average height, plain gray jumpsuit, no name tag, no rank, no insignia. She could have been anyone: a maintenance tech, a civilian contractor, someone who'd wandered in by mistake. But the way she stood wasn't ordinary. Her weight rested lightly on the balls of her feet, shoulders squared but relaxed. She looked calm, too calm. At the back of the room, Fleet Admiral Marcus Vance, the base commander, watched her carefully. He didn't laugh. He'd seen that posture before long ago, in a place where the sound of jet engines had mixed with gunfire and the smell of burning oil. The stance of someone who'd been under real fire, who knew what to do when everything went wrong. Vance's eyes narrowed. Thorne, drunk on the attention of his peers, kept talking. "This machine simulates 9GS. The Omega Protocol replicates a full system collapse at Mach 2. Most trained pilots black out halfway through. You wouldn't last 30 seconds. The woman's gaze didn't waver. She wasn't looking at Thorne at all. Her eyes were fixed on the white sphere of the simulator pod, as though she were studying it or remembering it. The laughter around her died slowly. The air changed, though no one could say why. Maybe it was the way she shifted her hands, subtle, almost invisible, the motion of someone who had done this before. Thorne noticed, frowned. "What?" he snapped, suddenly unsure of himself. The woman finally spoke. "Request permission to run the Omega Protocol." Her voice was low, clear, steady, not defensive, not angry, a statement of fact. The sound of it cut through the room. Thorne blinked. "Excuse me." "I'm requesting permission to run the Omega Protocol," she repeated, her tone flat, procedural. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted nervously. Thorne laughed, but it sounded forced. "You can't be serious." She didn't reply. And that silence, that absolute lack of need to explain herself, was what began to unsettle him. He glanced at Admiral Vance. The old man was still watching, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Fine, Thorne thought. Let her embarrass herself. "All right then," he said finally, trying to sound casual. "You want to fly, fly. Sign the waiver on the console, you'll need it." He turned away as if the matter were beneath him. He didn't realize he'd just walked into history. The woman nodded once, precise, almost military, and walked toward the pod. Every eye followed her. The metallic clicks of her boots echoed against the metal gantry. She didn't look back, didn't hesitate. A young technician, barely 20, held out the datapad with the waiver. His hands trembled. "Ma'am, you really don't have to." She met his eyes. Whatever he saw there froze him in place. Calm, cold, unafraid. She signed, just a name, a smooth motion of the stylus. She handed the pad back, climbed into the cockpit, and pulled the canopy down. The hiss of the seal echoed like the closing of a vault. The lights dimmed. The panoramic display came alive. Outside the glass wall, the simulation world appeared, a forward airbase carved into digital mountains, dawn light painting the pixelated horizon. Inside, she sat in the cockpit of an F-35 Lightning II. Thorne leaned back against the rail, smirking. "All right, people," he said, "let's watch the pro." The technician started the sequence. The simulated jet screamed down the runway and took off, slicing into the digital sky. Phase 1 high-altitude evasion, Thorne narrated. "Sam launch, 9GS, let's see how long she lasts." On the main screen, warning lights flared. 3 red triangles missiles locked onto her. The jet twisted violently, flare bursts painting the sky. Then, silence. All 3 targets exploded harmlessly behind her. A few officers murmured. Thorne forced a grin. Lucky break. But Admiral Vance said nothing. His eyes were sharp now, fixed on the data feed. Phase 2, the technician called. Omega Cascade initiating. The alarms shrieked. Systems failed one after another. Engine out, hydraulics gone, avionics offline. The F-35 began to tumble out of control, a whirling, dying bird. Thorne leaned forward. "There it is," he said softly, "game over." But then something impossible happened. The tumbling stopped. The jet steadied, barely wobbling, nose pulling up against gravity's pull. She's flying manual trim," the technician whispered. "No hydraulics, no engines." That wasn't possible. No one moved. She was gliding, dead stick, full manual over the ridgeline, the simulated terrain racing up toward her. "She's going for the emergency strip," the tech said. 20 miles out, she won't make it." But she did. With meters to spare, the jet cleared the ridge, nose up, sliding toward the narrow strip of runway. No gear, no power. A flash of sparks, the sound of grinding metal. The F-35 slid the length of the runway, trailing fire and dust. Then stillness. Perfectly centered, 10 feet from the end. The screen froze. Text appeared in green across the display. Omega protocol complete, survival 100%, score perfect. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. They were staring at something no one had ever seen before. Thorne's smirk vanished, his jaw slackened. The canopy of the simulator hissed open. The woman climbed out, calm as ever, no sweat, no tremor. She walked down the gantry. The officers parted like water before her. Her gaze passed over Thorne, not angry, not smug, just nothing. He didn't exist. At the back of the room, Admiral Vance stepped forward. Every officer snapped to attention, spines rigid. Every officer except her. She simply waited. Vance stopped in front of her. For a long moment they said nothing. Then he raised his hand to his brow, a salute. But not the kind an admiral gives a subordinate. This was different. This was deference. Reverence. Every head in the room turned. The sound of the salute was like a thunderclap in the silence. Thorne's mouth fell open. An admiral saluting a maintenance tech. Vance held it for a heartbeat longer, then lowered his hand. "It's been a long time, Ghost," he said. The word struck the air like a bell. "Ghost." The younger officers frowned, confused, but some of the senior men went pale. They'd heard the stories, classified, whispered, half-myth. The test pilot who'd flown missions no one admitted existed. The one who'd written the book on F-35 combat. The one who vanished years ago. "Ghost." The woman didn't move. She didn't deny it. Vance turned toward the technician. "Authorization code, Vance Omega 1, display personnel record." The young man's fingers shook as he typed. The panoramic screens flickered, then filled with a red-bordered service record, most of it blacked out. The name glowed at the top. Redefined. Below it, a title, Director, Naval Aviation Skunk Works Division. And beneath that, certifications, medals, aircraft types, operations so classified the lines dissolved into static. But there was one final entry, and it silenced even the breath in the room. Rank Admiral. Thorne's knees nearly gave out. The woman he had mocked, the one he told to get coffee, outranked every single person in that room. Vance's voice was low but sharp enough to cut glass. Admiral Reed is here undercover, conducting a readiness assessment, evaluating not just our systems but our people. He stepped closer to Thorne. And you, Commander, have just given her an excellent demonstration of institutional arrogance. Thorne couldn't speak. His throat closed around the weight of his own humiliation. Reed finally spoke again. The simulator's core logic is sound, she said softly. The human element, however, requires recalibration. No one moved. Her words weren't loud, but they carried the power of judgment. She turned to the young technician. Petty Officer Jensen, your system readouts were clear. You maintained composure under pressure. Well done. The kid blinked, trying to hide his disbelief. Thank you, ma'am. Reed nodded once and walked toward the exit. Her boots echoed again, steady, deliberate. As she passed the officers, they stepped aside, not because they were ordered to, but because something in them understood instinctively that they were standing in the presence of a storm they could never control. She left the bay without looking back. The door slid shut behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the room wrapped in the suffocating silence of realization. Admiral Vance turned his gaze toward the stunned officers. That, he said quietly, was competence. He paused, eyes resting on Thorne. Everything else you heard today was noise. No one answered. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans and the faint creak of leather gloves as Vance folded his hands behind his back. Outside in the hangar beyond the simulator room, the sound of distant engines rose, a jet preparing for takeoff. Maybe it was just a training sortie. Or maybe it was something else. Because somewhere above them, the woman in gray, Admiral Evelyn Reed, ghost of the skis, was already gone. And every soul in that room knew one thing with perfect, humbling certainty. They would never forget the day they learned that silence could fly. How do you come back from being destroyed in front of your entire command? For Lieutenant Commander Thorne, there was no manual for that. The story of what happened in Simulator Bay 3 spread faster than jet fuel catching fire. It moved through the corridors in whispers first, then in disbelief, then in quiet, shameful awe. By nightfall, everyone on the base knew or thought they knew what had happened. The arrogant officer who mocked the wrong woman. The woman who wasn't a technician at all. The woman who had flown the Omega protocol perfectly, and then saluted by the fleet admiral himself. They called her Ghost. No one said her name out loud. There was a superstition already forming, that speaking it too easily diminished it. For Thorne, the silence was worse than any formal reprimand. He woke the next morning to find his inbox flooded with schedule adjustments. His command privileges had been quietly revoked, his calendar cleared, his desk reassigned. He hadn't been demoted, not officially. The Navy didn't need to do that. Humiliation had already done its job. He walked into the hangar bay, trying to pretend nothing had changed, but everyone's eyes followed him. Some looked at him with pity, others with something colder, satisfaction. A junior pilot walked past and muttered, "That's him." Thorne kept walking, jaw tight. He wanted to turn, to bark back, to reassert command, but his voice caught somewhere in his throat. Because the truth was, he had no command left to assert. He'd seen something he couldn't explain, a flight that defied physics, a woman who'd flown without arrogance, without effort, without even seeming to care whether anyone believed her. And that silence, that calm, had stripped every ounce of noise from him. In the following days, Admiral Reed disappeared. No one saw her on base, not at the officers' mess, not in the hangars, not even in the command tower. She was gone or invisible. But her presence was everywhere. The simulator bay where she'd flown was cordoned off. A temporary calibration update sign hung on the door, But everyone knew that wasn't the reason. The techs working inside said it felt different now, like the air had a pulse. Admiral Vance made no official statement. He didn't need to. Every officer on the station understood what had just happened. A silent audit had taken place, the kind no one had prepared for. Reed had come looking for weakness. She had found it, and she'd exposed it without raising her voice. Thorne couldn't sleep. The image of the red line haunted him, the telemetry printout from the simulation. Perfect. Flawless. It shouldn't have been possible. He knew every parameter of the Omega protocol. It was designed to fail. She didn't just survive it, she bent it. At 300 hours, he found himself in the simulator bay again, the lights low, the air cold. The technicians were gone. The simulator sat idle, canopy open like a sleeping creature. He stood there staring at it. He wanted to hate her, he really did. But he couldn't. What he felt instead was something he hadn't felt in years. Ugh. He reached out and placed his hand on the smooth white surface of the simulator pod. "How the hell did you do it?" he whispered. The empty room gave no answer. "Sorry." Thorne turned. A young petty officer, Jensen, stood in the doorway, the same one who'd handed Reed the waiver. "What are you doing here, Jensen?" "Just checking system diagnostics, sir." Thorne studied him for a moment. "You were here that day?" "Yes, sir." "What did you see?" Jensen hesitated. "You mean during the flight?" "No," Thorne's voice was quiet. "I mean her." The young man looked down. "She wasn't like anyone I've ever seen, sir. She didn't react. She didn't panic. It was like she already knew what was going to happen." Thorne exhaled slowly. "Did you know who she was?" "No, sir. Not until the Admiral said her name." Thorne nodded. Silence stretched between them. "You were calm," Thorne said finally, "during the cascade." "Just doing my job, sir." She told him that too. "You maintained your bearing under pressure. That is the standard." Thorne's throat tightened. "That's the standard," he repeated softly, as if testing the weight of the words. He left without another word. Outside, dawn was breaking. The sky over the airfield burned orange, streaked with contrails from early training flights. Thorne stood there, watching them rise, one after another, white trails cutting clean lines through the morning haze. He used to feel pride seeing that. Now, all he felt was the hollow echo of what pride had cost him. "She is evaluating not just the machines," Vance had said. "She is evaluating the people." And she had. Every arrogant smirk, every dismissive glance, every time he'd spoken louder to sound right. She'd seen it all. That thought stayed with him for weeks. Around the base, small changes began to appear, subtle, quiet, powerful. In the ready room, pilots who once bragged about their kill ratios now spoke in low tones, discussing procedure, systems, weather reports. The noise was gone. The room felt sharper. Someone had printed a still from the simulator feed, the final frame showing the F-35 resting on the digital runway. Beneath it, someone scrawled in black marker, "Silence wins." No one admitted to putting it there. No one removed it either. Admiral Vance noticed too, the shift, the restraint, the focus. He didn't call it discipline. He called it recalibration. He had always believed culture was built by orders, but Reed had shown him it could be changed by example and by silence. It was 3 weeks before anyone saw her again. She appeared at the far end of the flight line on a windless afternoon, dressed in the same gray jumpsuit. No medals, no escort, just her. She moved between the maintenance crews, stopping occasionally to ask quiet questions about diagnostics, about performance reports, about maintenance intervals. Her tone wasn't commanding. It was curious. The young crew chief answering her didn't realize who she was until he looked up and saw Admiral Vance watching from across the hangar, hands clasped behind his back, smiling faintly. Word spread fast she's here. Within an hour, half the base had found excuses to pass by Hangar 12. Thorne didn't go. Not yet. He stayed at his desk, paperwork untouched, eyes on the same line of text he'd written a dozen times. Leadership is accountability under pressure. He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he stood. By the time he reached the hangar, she was already walking away, heading toward the perimeter road that led to the observation tower. He hesitated, then followed. When she heard his footsteps, she didn't turn. "Admiral," he said quietly. She stopped but didn't face him. "Commander," she replied evenly. He swallowed hard. "I came to apologize." "For what?" "For underestimating you, for everything." She turned then, not with anger, but with calm interest, as though studying a new flight pattern. "Underestimation isn't an offense, Commander," she said. "It's a symptom." He frowned. "Of what?" "Fear," she said simply. "You feared losing control, so you spoke louder. You made others smaller to make yourself feel certain. That's what arrogance really is, fear disguised as confidence." Thorne didn't answer. Her words were surgical. She stepped closer, eyes steady. "What did you learn?" He thought for a long moment. That competence doesn't need an audience. Something flickered in her eyes, approval maybe. "Good," she said softly. "Then you've already started to recalibrate." She turned to leave, then paused. "Do you know why I flew the Omega Protocol, Commander?" He shook his head. "It's designed to be unwinnable, a test of how pilots handle failure, not victory, failure. I needed to see how your people reacted when confronted with the impossible." She looked back at him. "You failed beautifully." The words stung, but there was no cruelty in them. She continued walking, her gray figure fading into the glare of the afternoon sun. Thorne stood there for a long time, the heat from the tarmac rising around him, the sound of distant jets echoing like ghosts across the base. He knew what she meant. He'd failed not as a pilot but as a man, and in that failure he'd seen himself clearly for the first time. That night he found the old simulator report again. He printed the data, the flight path, the impossible curve of the descent, the recovery, the perfect line. He taped it above his desk. No caption, no explanation. Just that red line, thin, unbroken, unwavering. Every morning after that, before beginning his day, he would look at it. And every morning he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. Because sometimes the most powerful lesson doesn't roar. It whispers. And the whisper stays forever. How does silence become legend? No one planned it, it just happened. Days passed, then weeks, and Admiral Evelyn Reed's quiet influence began to ripple through the naval air station like a steady tide. Not loud, not visible, but constant. The flight crews didn't talk about the ghost incident anymore, not openly. It wasn't gossip material now. It was something closer to ritual, a kind of quiet reverence that showed in how they moved, how they spoke, how they prepared. The simulator bay, once a place of noise and swagger, now felt like a chapel. Even the techs noticed it. Conversations happened in hushed tones. The laughter that used to echo off the metal walls had been replaced by concentration. The air was heavier but purer somehow. Every so often, a junior pilot would sneak into the bay after hours, sit in the observer's chair and just stare at the simulator pod, as if looking for ghosts in the machine. Because everyone knew that's where she had drawn the line. The Reed line. It started as a nickname, half joke, half myth. Someone had printed out the telemetry from her perfect simulation. That smooth, red arc of flight, impossible, graceful, unwavering. At first, it was just a curiosity pinned to a bulletin board. But within a week, someone framed it. Then someone else moved it into the main briefing room. And then it stayed. Every pilot who passed it stopped, even for just a second. Some saluted it. Some whispered something under their breath, small prayers of steadiness, humility, control. No one ordered them to, they just did. That was how legends worked. They didn't demand belief, they earned it. Lieutenant Commander Thorne saw it every day. He didn't touch it, didn't dare. But he studied it, every curve, every vector, every impossible decision point in that scarlet arc. And slowly, something inside him began to change. He started showing up early to the simulators, not to run drills but to watch others, to listen, to understand where they hesitated, where they lost composure. He didn't bark orders anymore, he asked questions. How's your breathing rate during G-pull? What's your focus when the alarms start? What's the first thing you reach for when it all goes wrong? The younger pilots didn't know what to make of him at first. The old Thorne was gone. This version was quieter, sharper, slower to speak. When he did speak, his words carried weight. Because silence, once learned, has gravity. It was one of those long, blue-gray evenings when Admiral Vance found him alone in the simulator bay. Still haunted? The old man asked. Thorne didn't turn. Haunted, one word for it, sir. Vance stepped beside him, both men facing the empty pod. She got under your skin. Thorne gave a faint, humorless smile. That's one way to describe being vaporized in front of the entire command. Vance chuckled quietly. Humiliation can be a powerful teacher, if you let it. I'm trying. I know. The Admiral's voice softened. She didn't do it to destroy you, Commander. She did it to reveal something not just to you but to everyone here. This place was drifting. Too much ego, too much noise. She came to reset the tone. Did you know, Thorne asked, that she'd come here? Vance hesitated. I suspected. She doesn't exactly ask permission. They both laughed quietly. Thorne's smile faded. Who is she really, sir? Vance was silent for a moment. Then he said, she's what happens when excellence outlives recognition, when someone stops flying for medals and starts flying for truth. Thorne frowned. You talk about her like she's not human. Vance turned to him. She's more human than most I've met. That's what makes her terrifying. The two men stood there for a long time, watching the flickering reflection of the simulator lights. Then Vance spoke again, softly. Do you know what she told me before she left that day? Thorne shook his head. She said, machines evolve faster than people, but people still crash harder. The words hung in the air. Meaning what? Thorne asked quietly. That we build smarter systems, stronger engines, better weapons, but our egos don't evolve. Our arrogance stays primitive, and it kills us. Vance's tone hardened. You're proof she was right. Thorne took the blow without flinching. Maybe, but I don't intend to stay proof forever. Vance studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then make sure when they tell the story next time, you're not the villain, you're the lesson. He walked away, leaving Thorne standing alone, the hum of the simulator the only sound in the room. Outside, the night was thick and quiet. But the base was changing. Small things first. Flight briefings ran smoother. Debriefs lasted longer. Pilots began cross-training instead of competing. Maintenance crews were given seats at planning tables. For the first time, rank didn't dictate respect, performance did. No one announced the change, it just took hold. And Admiral Reed, though rarely seen, was always the unseen gravity pulling it together. She appeared only when necessary, never for ceremony, never for show. Sometimes she'd walk through the hangars at dawn, cup of coffee in hand, watching the crews run pre-flight checks. She would pause beside a mechanic tightening a panel or a pilot double-checking their instrument readouts. Her questions were always simple. What's the tolerance on that system? How long since you recalibrated that sensor? What did you learn from yesterday's sortie? And always, she listened more than she spoke. She wasn't testing them anymore. She was teaching wordlessly. It became a kind of rhythm, the legend walking the line, the crews standing a little straighter when she passed. But not out of fear, out of respect. Thorne saw her once more that month. He hadn't planned to, it just happened. He was sitting on the observation deck above the runway at sunset. The sky was burning gold, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and salt. Below, a training exercise had just ended. Two FA-18s taxied toward the hangars, engines whining down. Then he saw her. She was walking alone across the tarmac, that same gray jumpsuit catching the last of the light. He watched her stop beside one of the young pilots climbing out of his jet, a kid barely out of flight school, his movements jerky, nervous. Reed said something to him. The boy nodded, then listened. She pointed once toward the horizon, a small gesture, but precise, meaningful. The boy nodded again, saluted, and Reed simply touched her hand to the side of the jet before walking away. The gesture was quiet, almost ceremonial. Thorne exhaled. "She's rewriting the culture," he murmured. The Master Chief sitting near him heard it and nodded. "She's not rewriting it, sir. She's restoring it." "How so?" The old chief smiled. "Back to when competence mattered more than noise. Back to when the loudest guy in the room wasn't the one people followed." Thorne didn't answer. He just kept watching her walk away, the wind tugging at her hair, the sunlight fading behind her. He realized something then. Reed hadn't just changed the base, she changed the metric. What people valued, what they feared, what they respected. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closing for a moment. Competence doesn't need to announce itself. He finally understood what that meant. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a way of existing. A discipline of restraint. That night, Thorne opened his logbook. He wrote only one line. To fly like Reed is to fight against noise. He closed it, knowing he'd spend the rest of his career trying to live up to those words. The next morning, before sunrise, the entire base was awakened by the thunder of afterburners. Someone was running a simulation. Unauthorized. When the control tower checked the schedule, there were no names logged. But the telemetry coming through the data feed, the precision, the discipline was unmistakable. She was flying again. For the next 30 minutes, the screens in the observation bay came alive with the impossible, not chaos this time, but art. The digital jet danced between ridgelines, threading valleys, cutting the horizon like a silver blade. Every maneuver was perfect, deliberate, controlled. And then, as quietly as it began, it ended. The simulator shut down, the canopy opened. But when the techs rushed to check, she was gone. Only a note left on the console, written in neat block letters. Precision is respect made visible. The message spread by morning. By noon, someone had framed the note and placed it beside the Reed line in the briefing room. 2 relics now. 2 reminders. And together they told a truth every aviator began to live by. That mastery isn't volume, it's control. That arrogance isn't confidence, it's fear. And that true strength doesn't demand to be seen, it makes itself undeniable. As the weeks turned into months, those lessons became doctrine. Admiral Reed never gave a speech about it, never published a manual. She didn't have to, because what she taught couldn't be written down. It had to be lived. And so they lived it, the pilots, the techs, the officers, in the way they prepared, in the way they spoke, in the way they treated one another. The Reed line wasn't just a flight path anymore. It was a way of being. And for the first time in his life, Lieutenant Commander Thorne found peace, not in command, not in glory, but in quiet service to something greater. Sometimes, late at night, he'd stand alone in that dim simulator bay, hand resting on the cold metal of the pod, and whisper to the ghost who changed everything. Message received. What happens when a myth starts walking among mortals again? It doesn't announce itself, it just arrives. By the start of the next quarter, the Naval Air Station had become something entirely different. You could feel it the moment you stepped onto the tarmac, the air thicker, quieter, sharper. The old swagger was gone. The hangar laughter, the posturing, the noise of rank and ego, all replaced by something that felt almost sacred. They called it the shift. Nobody really knew when it began, or how, but everyone agreed on one thing. It had started the day Admiral Evelyn Reed flew the Omega Protocol. And though she was rarely seen now, her presence lived in every cockpit, every maintenance bay, every checklist. The base was running cleaner, sharper, more human. She had changed the rhythm. Thorne, once the loudest voice on the floor, now spoke with the weight of silence behind every word. His subordinates noticed. He didn't bark orders anymore. He asked for clarity. He gave space for answers. He treated mistakes not as insubordination, but as moments for recalibration. He'd become something unexpected, a quiet mentor. Sometimes the younger pilots still whispered when he passed, but now it wasn't mockery, it was curiosity. They wanted to understand what had changed him. He didn't tell them, not directly. He just pointed to the framed read line in the briefing room. That, he'd say simply, that's everything you need to know. And somehow that was enough. The read line had become a kind of scripture now. New recruits were brought to see it on their first day, a simple printout of a digital miracle. The older crew would watch the rookies' faces, waiting for that first flicker of awe. One of the chiefs would explain, she flew the unwinnable, brought it home with nothing but trim and discipline. And if one of the new pilots smirked or shrugged, there was always someone ready to add, you'll understand the line after your first near failure. Because everyone eventually did. Every pilot reached a moment where they faced their own chaos, too much wind, too little altitude, systems blinking red, and found themselves whispering the same thought in their helmets. Hold the line. Hold the read line. That was her gift. She written a lesson into their muscle memory. And even when she wasn't there, she was. Admiral Vance saw it too. He watched the base run with a new kind of precision. Less shouting, more listening, fewer crashes, better scores. Pilots were calmer under pressure. Even the maintenance reports were cleaner, more meticulous. Reed hadn't given them more resources. She'd given them perspective. And perspective was worth more than hardware. Vance often found himself remembering her words. The human element requires recalibration. She had been right. Now that recalibration had spread like voltage through a circuit, quiet, invisible, unstoppable. Still, there was one person who couldn't let it rest. Thorne. He carried the memory of that day like shrapnel under the skin, not pain anymore, but presence. He studied her flight data, not out of obsession, but reverence. He wanted to understand how she had done what no one else could, how she had turned the impossible into method. It wasn't luck. It was choice. And every day, he came closer to understanding what that choice meant. It wasn't about control. It was about surrender, surrendering ego, surrendering fear, surrendering the noise. He'd never admit it out loud, but she had saved him from himself. One afternoon, he found himself in the maintenance hangar, standing beside a young ensign, a female pilot, fresh from flight school, shaking as she prepared for her first advanced simulator test. She was pale, nervous, fingers twitching as she double-checked her checklist for the 5th time. "Ensign," Thorne said softly. She jumped slightly, turned, "Sir. You've read the procedure enough. You're not flying the checklist. You're flying the jet." "I know, sir. I don't want to mess it up." He studied her for a long moment. "You know what Admiral Reed said after she landed the Omega run?" The ensign blinked. "No, sir." "She said the simulator was fine. The humans needed recalibration." The girl frowned, not sure what to say. Thorne smiled faintly. Don't aim for perfect, aim for steady. Perfection is noise, steady is flight. The words steadied her. He could see it happen in real time, her shoulders lowering, her breathing even. She went into that simulator calm. And when she came out, she'd passed. Later that night, as Thorne left the hangar, he saw something that stopped him cold. Admiral Reed. She was standing alone under the sodium lights, her gray jumpsuit faintly glowing in the haze. She was looking up at the stars, or maybe the flight path of some faraway jet. He froze, unsure whether to approach. Then she spoke without turning. "You learned." Her voice was quiet, almost lost in the wind. Thorne stepped closer. "Still learning, ma'am." She turned then, her expression unreadable. "Good, because the moment you think you're finished, you start falling." He nodded. "I understand that now." "I know." There was a pause, the kind that carried weight. "Why me?" he asked softly. "Why humiliate me like that? There were others louder, worse." Reed's gaze didn't waver. "Because you could still change." He swallowed hard. "And the others?" Her voice was soft, but it carried a hard edge. "Some men only learn when they lose everything. Others never learn at all." The wind moved between them, carrying the faint scent of fuel and salt. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Her eyes lifted to the sky. "Regret is a luxury, reflection is the duty." He wanted to ask more, but she was already walking away, her silhouette fading into the dim orange glow of the runway lights. That was the last time he saw her for months. After that, Admiral Reed vanished again. Rumors spread: special assignment, classified inspections, maybe something off book. But her absence only deepened her legend. By the time the next generation of recruits arrived, she had become something larger than rank. Instructors didn't say her name anymore, they invoked her. During safety briefings, if someone tried to cut corners, an officer would just say, "Would Reed skip that?" And the answer was always silence. That was enough. Even the flight simulator's startup sequence had been modified, unofficially. When a trainee launched a new run, a small line of text flashed on the screen before initialization. "Respect begins in silence." No one knew who coded it in. No one removed it either. Thorne suspected it was Jensen, the young petty officer Reed had praised that first day. The kid had been promoted since then, quietly competent, calm under pressure. Reed had seen him too. It was strange, the way her influence rippled outward, invisible but constant, like wind patterns you couldn't see, only feel. Months passed, seasons shifted, and the base kept running tighter, cleaner, better. And yet one night, as Thorne walked past the empty simulator bay, he noticed something different. The lights were on, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was still, humming faintly with electricity. He stepped closer. The simulator pod was active. The display screens flickered, but there was no pilot inside. Only data scrolling, patterns, variables, signatures. It looked like a self-test. But it was. At the bottom corner of the main screen, a single message blinked in small white text. "Protocol Reed engaged." Thorne's heart kicked hard. He didn't know what it meant, but somehow he felt she was there somewhere, watching. The system ran for exactly 3 minutes, then it powered down. When the lights dimmed, he saw something taped to the console, a folded maintenance tag with a handwritten note. "Excellence doesn't need an audience, just integrity." He didn't know how it got there. But he didn't need to. He folded the tag carefully, slipped it into his pocket and whispered, "Message received, Admiral." From that night forward, he carried it with him everywhere, tucked into his flight manual, a quiet relic. And somehow, when things got hard, when training missions went wrong or storms hit mid-sortie, the word steadied him. Because that's what she'd taught them all. That steadiness wasn't talent, it was character. That silence wasn't weakness, it was strength under control. That respect didn't have to be demanded, it could simply be lived. And that sometimes, the greatest leaders aren't the ones who speak, they're the ones who listen. Months later, when Admiral Reed's name appeared in an encrypted memo announcing her transfer to a deep black command, no one said a word. They just stood in front of the framed Reed line one last time, traced its perfect curve with their eyes, and remembered the quiet woman who had redrawn the boundaries of what it meant to lead. For some, she was a myth. For others, a mentor. But for all of them, she was proof that dignity doesn't shout. It acts. And that sometimes, the loudest thing a leader can do is stay silent. Where do legends go when the noise fades? They don't retire, they redeploy quietly. 6 months after the Reed line became gospel, a coded transmission slipped across Admiral Vance's secure channel. It carried no signature, just a timestamp and a single phrase. Spectre Initiative, Authorization Reed. He read it twice, exhaled once, and understood. She was moving again. The Spectre Initiative wasn't public knowledge. It wasn't even on paper. It lived in the cracks between Black Ops commands, where decisions vanished and history lost its witnesses. And Admiral Evelyn Reed was its architect. The message meant one thing: a silent flight was coming. No fanfare, no briefing, just her. That evening, while the rest of the base wound down to the low hum of routine, the hangar at the far end, Hangar 9, the one locked under 2 biometric seals, lit up. A new shape waited inside. Sleek, angular, almost alien. The X-47C, an experimental drone fighter hybrid she'd helped design. But tonight it wouldn't fly itself. Reed stood before it, gray jumpsuit, hair tied back, no rank displayed. Only the calm of a woman about to test the edge of the possible. She walked a slow circle around the jet, fingertips brushing its skin as if greeting an old friend. "Still unproven," she murmured. "Let's see if you remember who built you." No technicians remained inside. Only Jensen, now Chief Petty Officer, her quiet shadow. "Ma'am," he said, handing her the slate of pre-flight diagnostics. "All systems green. Flight AI minimal engagement per your request." "Good," she replied. "If the code can't follow instinct, it's not ready." He hesitated. "You'll be alone up there." Her eyes softened. "Always am." He nodded, understanding the weight of it, the kind of solitude only command can bring. Outside, the night was clear, stars sharp as metal shavings, perfect sky for ghosts. At 200, the X-47C rolled onto the private strip. No one else knew. No one else would. Reed eased into the cockpit, sealed the canopy, and powered the machine alive. Systems cascaded, screens blooming in hues of cobalt and amber. She whispered to herself, "Let's draw another line." Throttle forward. Engines roared. The Ghost lifted into the dark. From the observation tower, Admiral Vance watched through binoculars, expression unreadable. He hadn't authorized it, but he hadn't stopped it either. Some flights, he knew, existed beyond paperwork. The radar showed only fragments, bursts of signal, then silence. She was flying low, testing stealth patterns, bending light around her. Minutes stretched. Then a voice crackled through the encrypted channel. Calm, flat, hers. Spectre test, phase 1 complete. Hull integrity 98%, switching to manual override. Vance leaned forward. "Manual, she's out of her mind." Jensen, sitting beside him, smiled faintly. "No, sir, she's in her element." They watched as telemetry danced across the monitors. Impossible maneuvers, perfect corrections, velocity curves that no simulator could predict. Then came the turbulence. A cross-jet stream hammered the craft. One wing dipped. A warning flared, HYD fail. Vance gripped the console. She'll abort. But she didn't. Her voice came through again, steady as stone. Failure acknowledged, compensating trim manually. On screen, the trajectory twisted, then stabilized. The impossible happened again. The line she drew wasn't red this time. It shimmered blue on the monitor, bending, dipping, rising, fluid as breath. Vance exhaled slowly. She's rewriting flight physics again. Or rewriting faith, Jensen murmured. 20 minutes later, the jet touched down smoother than simulation data allowed. No fire, no sparks, just silence. Reed stepped out, expression calm, eyes bright with exhaustion and satisfaction. Vance met her halfway across the tarmac. "You disobeyed every procedural code we have," he said. "I updated them," she replied. He tried not to smile. "You could have been killed." She looked past him toward the dark horizon. Better to crash testing limits than rust protecting them. They stood there in the wind, commander and ghost, teacher and proof of concept. "You realize," Vance said quietly, "no one will ever know what happened tonight." Reed nodded. "Good, let the story stay small, the lesson will grow on its own." She turned away, leaving only the echo of jet engines fatting into dawn. When word reached Thorne that something classified had gone down in Hangar 9, he didn't ask. He just felt it, the subtle shift in everyone's posture, the quiet energy humming through the corridors. He found Jensen later that week running diagnostics near the hangar's perimeter. "She flew again, didn't she?" Thorne asked. Jensen looked up, hesitated, then said, "Some flights aren't logged, sir." Thorne smiled slightly. "Then she's still teaching." Jensen grinned. "She never stopped." They stood there for a while, watching a pair of trainees taxi their aircraft onto the runway. "Sir," Jensen said, "you think she ever doubts herself?" Thorne thought about that for a long moment. "No, I think she questions herself. There's a difference. Doubt paralyzes, questioning refines." Jensen nodded slowly, committing it to memory. Weeks later, a memo arrived, brief, encrypted, signed by Reed herself. To Vance Thorne Jensen. Subject: Protocol Legacy. Content: Remember, systems don't fail, people do. Keep calibrating. ER. That was all. But those words became another inscription. Someone printed them in block letters and pinned them beneath the Reed line in the briefing room. Now 3 relics hung there. The red line of survival. The handwritten tag, "Excellence doesn't need an audience." And the memo, "Keep calibrating." Together they told a story without telling it at all. Thorne often found recruits standing in front of them at odd hours, just staring. He never interrupted. Every aviator needed to make their own sense of the silence. He'd begun to see the deeper design behind her myth. She hadn't just saved a base. She built a mirror. A place where every officer could confront their reflection without hiding behind rank. She built a culture of introspection in a world trained to shout. And it was working. Flight scores continued to rise. Incident reports dropped to record lows. The crews trusted one another again. Humility had become operational policy. But quiet revolutions have costs. Late one night, Vance called Thorne to his office. The Admiral looked older, tired in a way authority can't fix. "She's leaving," Vance said. Thorne froze. "Leaving?" "Transfer to Defense Advanced Research. Black Project, permanent." Thorne swallowed. "She told you." "She doesn't ask, she just moves." Silence hung heavy between them. Finally Thorne said, "What happens to the base without her?" Vance smiled faintly. "That's the test, isn't it?" He turned toward the window, the lights of the runway stretching into darkness. "She didn't build followers, Commander. She built examples. Now we see if they hold." The night before her departure, Reed returned to the simulator bay one last time. Jensen waited there, standing at attention though no one had ordered him to. "You kept it running," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I thought it should be ready." "For who?" He hesitated. Anyone who needs to remember what's possible. She smiled, faint and real. Then you understand. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small data chip, and placed it on the console. What is it? He asked. The read line code, the original telemetry from the Omega flight, with the variables unlocked. Unlocked. She nodded. It was never about showing perfection. It was about showing how close I came to failure. Jensen looked at her, stunned. You want them to see the flaws? She met his eyes. Yes, because that's where the learning hides. He stood there speechless as she walked toward the exit. At the door she paused. Chief Jensen. Yes, ma'am. When they ask you who I was, tell them I was a student who never graduated. And then she was gone. Morning came with a thin gray mist. Her transport jet sat waiting on the far end of the tarmac, engines idling. No ceremony, no salute line, just a few figures watching from a distance, Vance, Thorne, Jensen. The wind carried the sound of turbines and the faint clatter of tools from a distant hangar. Thorne wanted to say something, anything, but when she walked past them, he realized words would only cheapen it. So he saluted, slow, steady. For a heartbeat, she returned it. Then she climbed aboard, the hatch sealed, and the jet rolled forward, disappearing into the low clouds like a memory dissolving. Vance lowered his hand, and just like that, he murmured, the quiet starts again. Thorne nodded, maybe that's the point. They stood there until the sound faded completely, until there was nothing left but the echo of silence, and the feeling that the air itself had changed shape. That evening, Thorne wrote in his logbook, She taught us to fly steady through failure. She taught us that silence can correct more than orders ever will. And she reminded us that leadership isn't rank, it's restraint. He closed the book, exhaled, and smiled. Because somewhere above the clouds, he knew she was still flying, testing, pushing, teaching in her own wordless way. And every pilot who drew a new line across the sky, steady and true, carried a fragment of her discipline within them. The ghost had vanished, but the echo of her restraint remained, guiding the living. Sometimes dignity doesn't leave footprints. It leaves coordinates. And those who can read them never fly the same way again. What happens to a lesson when the teacher disappears? It either fades or it proves itself. 3 months after Admiral Evelyn Reed's quiet departure, the base she'd reshaped finally met its first storm. Not training, not theory, a crisis. It began with a distress call from the Indian Ocean. A carrier group, USS Hayden, had suffered a mid-air collision during night operations. 2 aircraft down, 1 pilot missing, 1 crippled bird trying to limp home on fumes. The storm over that stretch of water was merciless. Black skies, crosswinds like hammer blows, rain thick as oil. The kind of weather that humbles even the best. Admiral Vance got the call just after 200. Within minutes, the operations center at the station erupted into motion. Thorne was already there, headset on, eyes locked on radar. Jensen manned the telemetry board. Crews filtered in silently, no shouting, no panic, just the calm rhythm Reed had taught them. Run a search grid, Vance ordered. Already projected, Thorne replied. I've got a probable ejection zone, but comms are dead. Vance studied the map. That's 300 miles offshore. Yes, sir, and the rescue helo can't reach through that weather window. Silence hung. Then Jensen said quietly, Sir, the drone prototypes, the X-47CS, they have the range. Vance turned slowly. They're not certified for storm conditions. Thorne met his gaze. Neither was she. A beat. Launch 1, Vance said. Within 20 minutes, Hangar 9 was alive again. The same bay that had held Reed's ghost flight now thrummed with urgency. Jensen prepped the drone. Rain hammered the roof like artillery. Every checklist was triple-checked, every command precise. Telemetry green, Jensen said. Autopilot engaged. Thorne hesitated. Disengage it. Sorry. Manual control. She didn't build them to think for us. She built them to extend us. Vance nodded once. Do it. Thorne slid into the control cradle, the same physical rig Reed had used months ago. The same seat, same stick, same hum under his hands. He exhaled. Let's see if I learned anything. The drone shot into the storm, a blade of light swallowed by black clouds. Inside the control bay, the room went still except for the rhythmic clicking of sensors. Thorne spoke softly to the crew. Keep chatter minimal. Focus on signal clarity. No one argued. The feed jittered with static, then cleared. A rolling ocean, lightning splitting the sky in white arcs. Altitude steady at 4,000, crosswinds 80 knots. Range, Vance asked. 240 miles. The drone bucked once, twice. Thorne steadied it, hands moving with the same economy Reed had once shown. Jensen watched the data feed. Sir, she coded storm stabilization routines into the flight AI, but they're dormant, manual only. Thorne smiled faintly. She trusted the pilot, not the program. Lightning flashed again. For a heartbeat, the monitor showed a torn piece of fuselage bobbing in the waves. Visual contact, Thorne said. Debris from an FA-18. Keep scanning, Vance ordered. Another blip, smaller, irregular. Then movement. Parachute, Jensen said, voice trembling. Sir, I think we found him. The camera zoomed. There, half-submerged, clutching a raft, was a pilot, alive, barely. Coordinates locked, Thorne said. We'll have to mark and relay to the rescue helo once the storm clears. Can you hold position? Negative, crosswinds tearing us apart. The telemetry spiked, one wing actuator red-lined. Vance leaned forward. Stabilize. Thorne's jaw tightened, working it. The drone pitched violently, alarms blaring. And in that chaos, every officer in the room flashed back to that first day. The Omega simulation, the impossible flight. Jensen whispered, Sir, you can ride the trim just like she did. Thorne heard her voice in his head. Perfection is noise, steady is flight. He eased pressure off the stick, letting the drone find its balance instead of forcing it. The movement smoothed, the tremors stopped. The room collectively exhaled. We're steady, Thorne said, marking beacon now. The screen blinked green, target fixed. Vance placed a hand on Thorne's shoulder. You just saved a life, Commander. Thorne didn't answer. He was still staring at the flight data, the blue line tracing across the radar, curving through turbulence like a ribbon of control. He whispered, Look at that. Jensen followed his gaze. The line was eerily familiar. Same arc, same grace, same steadiness. Another Reed line. By morning, the storm cleared. The rescue helo retrieved the downed pilot, alive, frost-numbed but breathing. The drone returned automatically, running on fumes, landing itself with a thud and a hiss. Crew gathered around it in silence. The hull was dented, wings pitted with salt and lightning burns. Thorne touched the metal. You did good, he said softly. Vance joined him. She'd be proud. Thorne shook his head. No, sir, she'd be verifying data. That made Vance laugh, weary and honest. You're probably right. Later that day, in the main briefing room, they printed the telemetry from the flight. Another curved line, this one blue, jagged at the start, smoothing toward perfection near the end. It went up beside the others. Red, black ink, blue. The trio of flight paths told a story without a single word. The original miracle. The silent correction. The proof of legacy. The pilots who gathered stared at it for a long time. No one spoke. Finally, Thorne broke the silence. Gentlemen, that's what happens when a culture remembers what it was taught. Jensen added quietly, and when a teacher doesn't need to be in the room. That night Thorne sat alone in his quarters, staring out the window. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath the moonlight. He opened his logbook. Today we found a man in the dark. We found him because of her, because she built steadiness into our hands, because she left us silence, and silence holds. He paused, then wrote one more line. Maybe that's command, to teach people how to fly without you. He closed the book, the wind rattling the glass behind him. On his desk sat the old maintenance tag she'd left. Excellence doesn't need an audience, just integrity. He turned it over for the first time. Something faint was scratched on the back, almost invisible in the worn plastic. A single coordinate. Somewhere over the Pacific. He stared at it for a long moment, then smiled. Weeks later, while on assignment with a joint training group, Thorne requested a deviation flight over that coordinate. Officially, it was a routine systems check. Unofficially, it was a pilgrimage. He reached the point at dawn. The ocean below was calm, smooth as glass. And then he saw it. A shape on the horizon, small, metallic, stationary. He circled lower. A drone buoy, experimental, its ID tag read Read 01. She'd been here, left it here like a breadcrumb for those who would understand. He activated the short-range transmitter, static, then a voice, recorded faint, filtered through layers of encryption. This is Admiral Evelyn Reed. If you're hearing this, you've already learned the first lesson. Steadiness is survival. Here, the second, never confuse silence with absence. Some of us teach from above the clouds. Then the signal ended. Thorne sat back, eyes wet, laughing softly. Of course you'd do this. He hovered there for a moment, then banked hard toward the sunrise. When he returned to base, he didn't mention it. He just uploaded the coordinates into the classified archive and labeled it simply, Read Marker. A week later, he found Jensen staring at it on the secure terminal. What is it? Jensen asked. Thorne smiled, just proof she's still flying. Months rolled on, the base thrived, new leaders rose, old egos stayed quiet. And across the Navy, other stations began hearing fragments, stories of anonymous inspections, of unmarked aircraft appearing during training missions, correcting flight paths, then vanishing. They started calling them ghost audits. No one could prove anything. But the pilots who saw them swore the maneuvers looked familiar. Smooth, controlled, impossibly calm. One even reported a message, flashing briefly on his HUD after a correction. Steady your trim. Vance received that report and laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. She's still teaching them, from the sky. Thorne just nodded, and none of them even know who she is. That's the beauty of it, Vance said. True influence doesn't need introduction. They sat in silence for a moment, watching through the window as two new recruits took off in formation. Their ascent was clean, balanced, precise. Vance folded his arms. Look at that, the line holds. Thorne smiled faintly. The line always holds, sir, as long as we remember why it was drawn. That night a thin envelope arrived on Vance's desk, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. It showed a new flight path traced across digital telemetry, gold this time. Underneath, a handwritten note. Legacy confirmed, keep calibrating, ER. Vance stared at it for a long while, then pinned it beside the others. Red, black, blue, gold. 4 lines, 4 lessons. He stood back and whispered the truth out loud, though no one else could hear it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it just leaves light behind. Where does quiet strength go when the world starts to shout again? It goes back to work. Evelyn Reed had disappeared from every roster but not from the sky. The Spectre initiative had evolved into something larger, an intelligence fusion unit buried inside Defense Advanced Research. No press releases, no insignia, just a black file stamped Silent Veil. That was where she lived now, among ghosts, algorithms, and decisions that never made it to daylight. For months, she led a network of unseen analysts and test pilots whose job was to predict failure before it happened, to hunt the human blind spot inside the machine. She called it preemptive humility. The rest of the brass called it Reed's religion. And then one evening, a message cut through the static of classified silence. Satellite 12 lost, possible hostile intercept, South China Sea. Normally, she would delegate. But the words possible intercept carried a smell she recognized, the smell of escalation. She'd flown too many borders not to feel it. She read the telemetry twice, folded the printout and said only, "Prep a Spectre bird." Her deputy commander Roth hesitated. "Ma'am, protocol states." "Protocol's why we miss what matters," she said. He stopped arguing. Hours later, she stood on a wind-scoured runway at a forward base whose name would never be spoken. Before her waited a matte black aircraft that looked more concept than plane. Spectre 04, a fusion of drone and fighter, a creature designed to see without being seen. The crew chief handed her the checklist. She didn't read it, she'd written it. "Storm front moving in, Admiral," he said. "Visibility." "Optional," she interrupted gently. He grinned despite himself. Everyone who worked under her did that, half fear, half faith. She climbed the ladder, slid into the cockpit, and the world narrowed to a soft hum and 1,000 points of light. The canopy sealed. The engines whispered alive. She whispered back, "Let's go find the silence between nations." Throttle forward, takeoff. The black ocean swallowed her whole. Down below, the command center in Arlington blinked with new feeds. Commander Roth stood at the central console. Spectre 04 airborne, tracking stealth corridor 7 Delta. No confirmation from hostiles. An admiral behind him muttered, "What the hell is Reed doing personally flying recon?" Roth didn't answer, because there was no answer, only belief. Up in the stratosphere, the world was ink and lightning. Reed's hands moved with patient precision. She flew without autopilot, trusting the small corrections her muscles remembered. The cockpit display pulsed faintly, ghost radar returning fragments. Then she saw it, a flicker at the edge of the grid. Unknown aircraft, no transponder, closing fast. She eased the throttle, reduced signature output, watched the blip merge into range. Then, without warning, a burst of electronic noise hit her comms, an attempted lock. She didn't panic, she listened. The static pattern had rhythm, Morse fragments. Not an enemy. A distress signal. She decoded it by ear, whispering the translation under her breath. Drone AI failure, autonomous, offline, fuel critical. One of theirs, experimental, lost control, and falling toward international waters where recovery would mean exposure, political disaster. She switched to manual intercept. Wind shear hit like a fist, altitude dropped, alarms barked, but she kept her breathing steady, voice calm. Spectre 4 engaging recovery trajectory. She dove into the storm. Lightning split the sky. The failing drone appeared below, tumbling end over end, a dying machine with U.S. markings half erased by rain. "Easy," she murmured. She matched its roll, synced speed. Her fingers danced over manual inputs, trying to link remote override. The systems refused. It wasn't listening. She tried again, different frequency, different tone, still nothing. She remembered something she once told Thorne. Machines evolve faster than people, but people still crash harder. Maybe that applied to code too. She made a choice no sane pilot would make. She disabled her safety perimeter and flew beneath the tumbling drone, closing to a distance of 20 meters. The turbulence slammed her body against the harness. Blood roared in her ears. She ignored it, hands steady, trim adjustments measured in millimeters. A small screen blinked. remote handshake possible. She sent a single line of code, hand-typed, the old way. Initiate read line override. For 3 endless seconds nothing happened. Then the drone's trajectory softened, its spin slowing then stopping. They fell together, 2 silhouettes in rain and fire, until both leveled, side by side, gliding like birds rediscovering instinct. She exhaled once, whispered, "Welcome back." Her console flashed green, link established. She guided it out of the storm toward safety. But the fuel alarm on her own jet was now screaming. Spectre 04 to base. Drone stabilized. I'm bingo on fuel. Static, no reply. The storm had eaten her signal. She looked at the gauge, 3 minutes to engine flameout. Too far from base, too close to contested airspace. She smiled faintly. Looks like we test silence again. She switched everything to minimal power, trimmed perfectly, and let gravity become her ally. The world narrowed to the glide path, a pure curve through darkness. Somewhere in the storm she thought of the others, of Vance, of Thorne, of the line on the wall. She heard their voices in her mind, "Hold steady." She did. The engines died. The craft glided black on black until the sea appeared, a sheet of silver under lightning. She aimed for a small island, unmarked, uninhabited, one she'd memorized years ago during training. Altitude dropping, control fading. At 200 feet, she flared the nose, bleeding speed. Impact, metal shrieked, sparks, then stillness. For a long moment, she just breathed, listening to the rain hammer against the hull. Alive. Hours later, a rescue team found the wreckage at dawn, the drone intact beside it. No pilot in sight, just a message painted across the sand in engine oil. Silence confirmed. They searched the island for 2 days, found footprints leading to the coast and ending at the waterline. No body. No signal. Nothing. Admiral Vance received the classified report in his office. He read it 3 times. Then he stood, walked to the briefing room and faced the wall of lines, red, blue, gold. He added one more strip of paper. Black ink, no color, just a single curve drawn by hand. Underneath he wrote, "The final descent status unknown." The room fell silent as officers gathered behind him. Jensen whispered, "Do we mark her as KIA?" Vance shook his head. "No, you don't mark a ghost, you follow it." Weeks passed. Officially, Evelyn Reed was missing in action. Unofficially, she became more myth than ever. New recruits heard stories. A pilot who landed without power on an island no map could name. A woman who flew into storms to pull machines back from the edge. Every version ended the same. She vanished because she'd completed her lesson. And yet, strange things began to happen. During training missions, telemetry feeds would sometimes display phantom data, a second signature mirroring the lead aircraft perfectly, then fading. A voice faint and calm, occasionally cut through comms interference. "Trim steady, trust the glide." It never appeared in recordings, but every pilot who heard it swore it was her. They started calling it the Echo. Vance never denied it, he just smiled whenever reports arrived. "She's still teaching," he'd say quietly, "just from higher altitude." Thorne, now the base's senior instructor, began opening each new cadet cycle with the same ritual. He'd lead them to the wall of lines, let the silence stretch, and then speak softly. "She showed us how to fly through failure, how to listen when the world screams. If you ever hear a voice in the static, don't fear it. That's just the standard reminding you to hold steady." The recruits nodded, half believing, half hopping. But months later, when one of them hit a compressor stall at altitude and managed an impossible recovery, the data curve on his recorder traced a shape everyone recognized. Smooth, precise, familiar. The read line, drawn again by another hand. On some distant radar screen thousands of miles away, An unidentified craft sometimes appears for a heartbeat. No transponder, no origin, altitude classified. Always alone, always silent. Analysts delete it from logs to avoid questions. But one technician, the kind who still believes in stories, keeps copies in a hidden folder labeled ER active. Because deep down, the people she taught all feel the same thing when storms close in. That somewhere above the clouds, she's still there, steady hands on invisible controls, guiding those who are learning to listen. How long does silence last after a voice disappears? Long enough to teach again. It had been a year since Admiral Evelyn Reed vanished into the storm. Official reports said presumed lost. But nobody at the base spoke of her in past tense. Because her lessons hadn't ended, they'd evolved. Under Thorne's command, the station ran like a living organism, not perfect but self-correcting. Mistakes no longer brought shouting matches, they brought reflection. Every flight began and ended in silence, the pilot's small ritual of respect. Before takeoff, they would stand beside the wall, 5 lines now. Red, blue, gold, black, and a new one drawn by Thorne himself in silver ink. It wasn't telemetry, it was metaphor. A curved line that bent upward into light. Beneath it the inscription read, "Silence doesn't end, it ascends." That morning the base prepared for an inspection. Cameras, brass, civilians. The kind of event Reed would have hated, full of words, full of ceremony. But this one wasn't about medals or ranks. It was about legacy. Admiral Vance had fought for years to create a new doctrine in the training manuals, a framework built on Reed's philosophy. It wasn't tactical, it was human. The Reed Principle. Command through calm, discipline through empathy, precision through humility. Every academy cadet now studied it. It wasn't mandatory, it was magnetic. Her words had outlived her voice. When the day of inspection arrived, a storm rolled in from the east. Rain again, heavy, insistent, drumming across the hangars like memory itself returning. The visiting officials frowned. "We'll have to delay the demonstration." Thorne shook his head. "No, sir, we fly as scheduled." Vance raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to show them a storm flight?" Thorne smiled faintly. "Seems appropriate." He walked to the tarmac, rain soaking his uniform, headset crackling. 2 training jets idled beside him, flown by his best students. Their call signs, Echo 1 and Echo 2. He stepped to the comms mic. "You both know the procedure. Remember what she said, perfection is noise." The first pilot laughed nervously. "Copy, Commander, steady through the noise." Engines roared. The jets lifted into gray. From the ground, all you could see were flashes of metal through cloud and water, 2 small symbols against something infinite. In the control tower, Vance watched in silence. Their telemetry danced across the monitor, clean, poised, alive. And then something strange happened. A third line appeared on the screen. No source, no signal ID. Just a single curve flying parallel to the others, smoother, higher, perfectly aligned. The technician blinked. "Sir, we have a ghost track." Vance leaned closer, his heart kicked. "Altitude. 35,000 and climbing." "Identification." The tech shook his head. "None, sir, it's not ours." The room fell utterly still. The 3 lines flew together across the radar, a trinity of motion. Then the ghost track peeled upward, arcing clean into space before fatting to nothing. Vance whispered, "I'll be damned." Thorne's voice came through the speaker. "Tower, we're reading a third craft. Please confirm." Vance swallowed. "Negative confirmation, Commander, must be interference." A pause, then Thorne's voice again, quiet, certain. "No, sir, that wasn't interference." He didn't elaborate, he didn't have to. Because everyone in that tower knew what they'd seen. When the jets landed, the rain had stopped. Thorne removed his headset, hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the horizon, the storm retreating, sunlight breaking through in fractured gold. Vance joined him on the tarmac. "You saw it too," Vance said softly. Thorne nodded. She always did prefer an unscheduled inspection. They both laughed quietly. The kind of laugh that carries sadness behind it, but also peace. Weeks passed. The radar anomaly was logged, encrypted, and filed under inconclusive. But around the base, a different kind of record spread, stories whispered in mess halls and flight decks. She's still up there. Nobody corrected them, because belief had become part of the structure. The recruits no longer needed her presence, they had her silence. And silence, once understood, becomes the greatest teacher of all. One evening, Thorne sat alone in his office, reviewing flight data. The hum of the base outside was soft, rhythmic, alive. He turned in his chair and looked at the wall of lines. For the first time, he noticed something he'd never seen before. Where the ink from the red line had faded slightly at one edge, a faint scratch glimmered beneath it, like something written before the line was drawn. He leaned closer. The letters were almost invisible, etched deep into the material itself. "If you're reading this, it means the lesson held." His breath caught. She had carved it there before the legend began, before the humiliation, before the flight that rewrote their lives. He laughed softly, a single tear running down his cheek. "You planned even this." He sat back, eyes on the wall. Then he whispered to the empty room, "We're still flying, Admiral, all of us." Far above, somewhere the air thins into silence. A signal flickered briefly across an unused satellite channel. No source, no call sign, just data coordinates. A circular pattern traced over open sea. Inside it, one line. Smooth, balanced, infinite. The satellite's AI, confused, auto-translated the pattern into text. Calibration complete. And then it vanished. Back on Earth, life moved on. The young pilots trained, graduated, and carried her words to new stations, new wars, new moments of impossible calm. One of them, a woman named Elena Perez, found herself years later in the same position Reed once had been, commanding a squadron of officers too young to understand what leadership costs. During a critical mission, her plane took a lightning strike. Systems failed. Panic clawed at her throat. But then a memory surfaced. "Hold the line, steady as flight." She whispered it aloud, hand steady, mind clear. She landed safely. In her debrief, when asked how she managed it, she just smiled. "I didn't. Someone else taught me how." Decades later, when the base was decommissioned, a team came to remove the wall of lines. They wanted to preserve them for the museum archives, relics of a generation. But when they lifted the panels, they found something hidden behind the final sheet of metal. A message burned faintly into the concrete. Dignity doesn't vanish, it evolves. Below it, initials carved deep, ER. The crew didn't report it. They just stood there in quiet awe. And for a long moment, the hangar filled with a strange stillness, like the air itself remembering. Outside, thunder rolled far off the coast. A soft wind passed through the open doors, carrying the faint hum of something unseen, a sound that could have been engines or memory or both. Admiral Evelyn Reed was never found. But maybe she wasn't meant to be. Maybe the point wasn't survival. Maybe the point was transcendence, the kind that doesn't raise flags, doesn't seek applause, doesn't even need a name. The kind that teaches, then disappears, leaving behind only the echo of steadiness. Because that's what she had always believed, that silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding. Years later, when people spoke of her, they didn't call her the woman they spat on. They called her the one who recalibrated the sky. And in every cockpit, every simulator, every briefing room that carried a version of her line, someone, somewhere, would look at that curve and feel it inside their chest. That quiet pull between fear and control. That moment when the noise fades, and all that's left is decision. That's where she lived. Not in medals, not in reports, but in the pause before courage. If you were to stand now on the old tarmac at dusk, when the sun drops low and the wind hums through the rusted towers, you might hear it too, faint, patient, eternal. A whisper caught between the sea and the clouds. Steady your trim, because some voices don't vanish with the wind. They become it. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.